So, this Saturday, the all-important rematch between Oleksandr Usyk and Anthony Joshua will be upon us. Will it be repeat or revenge? So, I've got a lot of points I want to address for this video. So I'm not going to dilly-dally, we're going to get straight into it. Before getting into the keys to victory for both men and making a formal prediction, however, I do feel it's necessary to outline areas that I feel were where the first fight was won and lost. And so for Usyk, within the opening seconds, he's able to slip outside of AJ's jab and is able to control Anthony Joshua's head as he attempts the same. And now in my pre-fight video for that fight, I said as soon as Oleksandr Usyk is able to get his head to the outside of Anthony Joshua's jab, because that's where so much of Oleksandr Usyk's boxing and his offense comes from, it's going to be very difficult for AJ because I'm not sure if AJ is going to have the ability to adapt to it. Lo and behold, that happened within the first 4 or 5 seconds of the fight. And it was almost like the writing was on the wall, because now it was just a matter of, can AJ adapt? And he kind of did, but not in a meaningful way. Usyk in general is a very three-dimensional fighter. And what I mean by that is he is able to go forward and backwards, so in and out essentially. He's able to slip side to side, but he's also able to go up and down. If you notice when Usyk is at long range especially, and he's jockeying for position, you'll often see him with his lead hand go below the opponent's lead hand, go above the opponent's lead hand. He will do that while slipping side to side, to the outside of the lead hand, to the inside of the lead hand. He'll also manage the distance with his feet by going closer and going further away. So this was just so bamboozling, not just for Anthony Joshua, but for many of Oleksandr Usyk's opponents, because they have probably the most mobile target in front of them that they've ever fought before. And with that mobility, it's not just a matter of being harder to hit, but that opens up different types of punches and different offense for Oleksandr Usyk. The glove control of Oleksandr Usyk was just so consistent throughout the entire course of the fight. You can see this is someone who's done this for a very long time, because at any given moment, any given chance, Oleksandr Usyk had some kind of just some kind of feeler, some kind of probe, just to, as I say, control the glove of Anthony Joshua, just every step of the way. Even when Oleksandr Usyk was dog-tired towards the end of the fight, his output was going down, his activity level was going down, he still made a conscious effort to control the gloves of Anthony Joshua. And if you see the effect of this, it's very subtle, but you start to see Anthony Joshua, his hands very close to his body. He wasn't able to extend himself over the space between them. And that's very surprising, because I understand that's partly Anthony Joshua's style, but he started the fight with his lead arm very much extended, trying to get that control over the space and then over his opponent. And of course, much bigger man in terms of stature, but also arm length and reach. But Usyk was the one, despite being the smaller man, who was able to extend himself over that space. And it's very subtle. It might seem inconsequential, but it does matter. Joshua, on the other hand, he remained very much on the center line, especially early on the fight. And he'd use some slight in and out motion, messing with the distance, coming closer, going further out. But the thing is, it was made to be void, because whenever Joshua would come into the next engagement, so he's now in punching range, he'd still be remaining on the line. And so even though he's using this in and out motion to kind of mess with the distance, as soon as he's in punching range, he's still in the center line. So it was, as I say, made void, because the target's still going to be in the same place when Oleksandr Usyk is able to punch it, when Joshua is in punching range. Joshua, from early on, he tried to establish a right-hand lead. And now, listeners of this channel and people who watch my videos, you know that I like this. I like a fighter who uses their or understands how to use their right hand as a jab, let's say. They bring their weight forwards to the front half of their stance, unloading the right hand and then using that as their jab. And AJ understood the importance of it, but he wasn't able to do it properly, I want to say, inverted commas, because he'd do it while remaining on the center line. And it wouldn't allow for the most proper positional change, because that's what it's there for. You change the positioning of your body to manage where your body weight is, and that will determine which punches are essentially power punches, where your body weight is. And so that involves getting to the front half of your stance, towards the front leg. And Anthony Joshua, he started to do it. He started to come off the center line, and the quality of it was a bit better. But the thing is, when AJ was in that aggressive position on the front half of his stance over his front leg, he was easily warded off by Oleksandr Usyk. And partly I think it was because of a lack of experience. It is nerve-wracking for anyone who sparred or fights or fought. You'll know that bringing yourself closer to your opponent when you slip to the front, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking, because you are physically bringing your head closer to your opponent, but on the flip side, you're also bringing your hands closer to the opponent. As I say, you mess with which hand is essentially your jab, your lead hand now. And Joshua, as I say, was easily warded off by Usyk because he didn't have an appropriate defense. Whenever Joshua would even slightly slip to that front half of his stance, you could see his right hand straying low. And what that would do, that's a pathway. That's a pathway, especially to the left hand of Oleksandr Usyk. And if Oleksandr Usyk was able to get lead foot dominance, which he was able to probably 90% of the fight, that would be a prime position for Joshua to get smashed by a left hook from Usyk, which proved to be a very damaging punch over the course of the first fight. So, yeah, Joshua, that defense wasn't there. And it sounds insignificant, but how can you expect to go into a position and affect your opponent from that position if you can't effectively defend yourself and stay in that position? You see what I mean? AJ did do a decent job of following Usyk back with... when Usyk would punch, Joshua... It was almost like a catch and counter, but it wasn't as explosive. It was more of a smooth transition where, as Usyk is retracting his hands, his arms from punching, Joshua would use that timing as a kind of gateway to throw his own. And he had a lot of success, particularly throwing his right hand after Usyk was retracting his jab. So, yeah, sometimes Usyk wasn't always mindful of Joshua retaliating, and Joshua did capitalize on that. It wasn't that much. It was usually like once or twice in Joshua's best rounds, but it was there, and it's something that could potentially be expanded on in this rematch. And so that being said, we can go into the keys to victory now for this fight. And now I've gone through the first fight with a fine-tooth comb, and I have to be honest, I struggle to find ways in which Usyk can improve. There are ways, don't get me wrong. For example, his punch technique, it could be a bit sharper to maximize power, but these are things that people have maybe had these maybe criticisms, I don't want to say that, but suggested improvements for Oleksandr Usyk that probably have been the case for the entirety of his career thus far. And so I'm not sure how realistic something like sharpening up his punch technique is, because it's clearly ingrained in his style and his movement patterns. So I don't think one training camp is going to repair that or alter that. So that's what I mean. These are things that he could do in theory, but I'm not sure how realistic they are. He could also maintain his pace in the first fight. I think it was around maybe the 9th, 10th round, that kind of area where you could see Oleksandr Usyk was maybe feeling the pace quite a bit. Now, he didn't completely fold. He wasn't gassing or anything like that. But the output and the activity clearly dropped. And it proved not to be a problem because he went on to finish the fight strong. But in an ideal world, a fighter could maintain the same pace throughout the entirety, every single round of a fight. But as I say, it's not realistic. And especially with Oleksandr Usyk, his style is inherently demanding. There's a lot of movement, a lot of activity. There is quite a bit of efficiency too, but it demands energy. To do it well, to do it with quality, it demands energy. So yeah, I have to admit that Oleksandr Usyk, and this is at least in my head because I do rate Oleksandr Usyk as having probably some of the best technique overall and best IQ in boxing. So unsurprisingly, I can't really suggest much other than maybe just being mindful, a bit more defensively aware in the kind of the down periods where maybe he's feeling the pace a little bit. But as I say, that I'm not sure how realistic that is, because you're in a fight, you're going to get tired, even just a bit, and that bit can affect your technique. So I have to be humble and admit that I don't think there are many ways I at least can improve Oleksandr Usyk. Joshua, on the other hand, I feel can improve in many ways, and I think we're all thinking no surprises there. But specifically, how can it be done? Firstly, I think Joshua has to use and maintain more of an active guard. Joshua was clearly caught on the centre line early, and he was caught cold. If you look in the first fight, he's getting tagged from early, from the first few seconds, and a lot of that came from just being stationary on the centre line, relying on the lead hand to manage the fight for him. But the thing is, Oleksandr Usyk is a fighter who's basically built his whole skill set being able to get around the lead hand. So you can't rely on that. You need to have other layers to your game. And I think Joshua using an active guard, it will allow him to come off the centre line and keep him safer, but it will also open up offense for him. And I talk about using the lead hand, the lead right hand, and I like to say that it doubles your arsenal. That's a saying I've never heard anyone else say it, but I've coined it. Talking about going to the front half of your stance, unloading the right hand, and then using that as a setup, because that can open up, say, the left hook, which is a punch that Joshua can throw well, but he wasn't able to get it off in the first fight. He was able to use a kind of setup version of the lead hand, which isn't as powerful. It's more of a long left hand, but his proper power left hand, left hook rather, he wasn't able to use that. However, if he's going to come off the centre line and move into these positions that are off of it, the front half of his stance, the back half of his stance, and anywhere in between, he needs to be able to defend himself while in those positions. And so that means having your hands in an appropriate placement, because having your hands up is not enough. I've covered this in videos, because you can have your hands up and it will limit your vision, and there will still be spaces for punches to come through. So that's why you need to change the positioning of your hand relative to what your opponent can hit you with. You need to block off that trajectory. So I think AJ needs to practice that. And I don't know if he has. I need to basically say a disclaimer that I'm not sure if these are what the fighters have worked on. I'm just saying this from my point of view of what I've seen and what I understand of boxing, what I was taught in boxing. And I feel that this can go a long way. As I said about earlier, Joshua did follow Usyk's punches well with his own. Talking about as Usyk's retracting his offense after landing it, Joshua would follow up. And that is essentially a catch and counter, as I say. It's just not as dynamic, it's not as explosive. It's a bit more of a relaxed tempo. And Matthew Macklin, he mentioned the catch and counter. And I feel that this would be a good strategy to pair with the lead right hand. Because imagine AJ has his head and his body weight primarily over his lead left leg. Assuming that he has lead foot dominance, which is a big assumption to make, but let's assume that he does. If he uses that right hand lead, potentially, or at least in the first fight, Oleksandr Usyk saw that as an opportunity to slip to his back foot, to the back half of his stance, and then land a left hand over the top. A very Mayweather-esque pull counter, but just a better technique for the record. And Usyk was countering that right hand with his left. But Usyk would have to be careful, because as he goes back, okay, he's not out of range, but he's in a position further away, from Anthony Joshua. But then as he comes in with that left hand, he brings himself closer to the front half of his stance, where he's now moving back into the punching range of Anthony Joshua, or more effective punching range of Anthony Joshua. And so if Anthony Joshua is cognizant of that, he could potentially use that right hand to bait the counter from Usyk. And as Usyk comes inwards to land that counter, Joshua turns over a left hook and catches Usyk. And if he manages to pull off that kind of sequence, I think that it would be very dangerous for Oleksandr Usyk. Will he though? Because I imagine that Usyk has seen people try to do that to him before. And as I say, a lot of it's predicated on, is Joshua able to get into that position in the first place, be patient enough to stay there and protect himself effectively while having lead foot dominance. You can start to see how this is a very difficult fight for AJ to win. Moving on though, I believe that is a strategy that can be paired, but also as a kind of overarching strategy, I think the punches of Anthony Joshua should be directed more so to the torso. And now, it doesn't have to be exclusive. He can still go for the head if he sees a chance, or if he creates a chance. But I think the punches mostly should be directed to the torso to pin Usyk down, because Usyk is already a smaller and more mobile target. And you can imagine his head is just darting all over the place. And so it's a challenge to land. But the body will always move less than the head. And I think just to pin Usyk down and maybe soften him up a bit, take away the energy, because being punched in the chest still takes it out of you. Because people think that, okay, the head, you don't want to let that get hit. You don't want to let your solar plexus and the softer part of your abdomen get hit. And the chest, you can afford to get away with it. No. Like, you can't, trust me. And you spar, you fight, you find out the hard way, especially when you fight someone who's bigger than you or is a big puncher. They land one in your chest and it'll freeze you up for a couple of seconds. Because think about it, your heart's in your chest. Like, that can take the wind out of yourselves. It's not necessarily painful, but it shocks you sometimes. It's a big jolt. And so I think Joshua should try to do that. Pin some offense on the torso just to really rough Usyk up, knock him off his stride, be physical, and potentially soften him up, make him more of a stationary target, and then land offense to the head. However, if Joshua opts to throw body shots, which I think is a good strategy, I think he has to remember that, particularly with the traditional hooks and uppercut kind of shovel hooks to the body, they can result in finishing on the center line, just based on the body mechanics, the technique, and like the punch trajectory. You can end up finishing on the center line because it's very hard to pull yourself and the punch through the body because it's such a big mass. And I'm not sure Oleksandr Usyk's going to be the kind of fighter to trade short hooking punches with Anthony Joshua. I don't think that's in Oleksandr Usyk's style anyway. But Joshua should be cognizant, be ready to maybe come back off the center line, finish with another shot, or come off the center line, move out of range, something like that. But just be aware that body shots can result in you being in that firing line, that center line, when you finish them. So, how do I wrap this up? So, contrary to popular belief, I think AJ actually fought a very good fight in the first fight, particularly in the middle rounds. And because I have that perception of Anthony Joshua fighting that kind of fight, I think the whole Chisora approach is a bit misguided, and it's become nauseating because people just see it as AJ needs to fight like Chisora. And they've said it so much that it's just, as I say, it's nauseating. But, you know, people really aren't considering that Anthony Joshua and Derek Chisora are two completely different fighters with completely different attributes. And if AJ was to employ that kind of rushing approach, trying to rush Usyk, I just believe that's reckless and unnecessary. And I don't even think it'd pay off. Maybe there's like a percentage chance that would pay off. Who knows? And AJ does it on Saturday and he wins. Now looks silly. Look, we'll see. But in my head, before the fights happened, I don't think that's a good strategy. Undoubtedly, though, AJ does need more fire and more grit. Something that Derek Chisora has in bags. So maybe some of that's rubbed off. Hopefully it has, for the sake of Anthony Joshua winning. And just as a little aside, I've had an eye on the media stuff, and I've seen Anthony Joshua wearing a lot of black. And now, if you're not into subliminals and stuff like that, disregard what I'm going to say, if you will. It's down to you. But typically, Anthony Joshua is someone who wears a lot of, I want to say, understated colours. He wears greys, khakis, kind of like petrol blues, that kind of, not very vibrant. And now black's not a vibrant colour. To my understanding, black isn't a colour, it's actually a tone. But if you look at the course of AJ's career, for many years now, since I want to say he's become mainstream, or, the kind of mainstream company man, if you will, the PC AJ, he's always come in wearing white. And now it might be white with a hint of something, but it's typically just white, mostly white. And I see that as, what does the colour represent? Now, white represents purity and cleanliness. And that's what AJ has been for the past few years. He's been very, very clean, squeaky clean almost. Trying to be very PC and very tame, like what white represents. Whereas before the Charles Martin fight, so before AJ became champion, he was fighting Dylan White, Gary Cornish, those guys coming up. And he was usually coming to the ring in reds and blacks with hints of reds and stuff like that. And what do these colours represent? Black represents darkness, represents evil almost, bad intentions, dark intentions, knockouts, if you want to speak in a boxing sense. How about red? Red represents fire, blood, destruction, violence, if you will, if you consider all those things. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see Anthony Joshua return to the old AJ, or at least attempt to, by thinking, what, I'm done with all this PC white trunks kind of stuff. I'm going back to the black. I'm going back to the red. I want the color of my trunks to represent my intentions going into this rematch. Kind of like what David Haye did in a similar sense when he went into the Tony Bellew rematch. He came in with his trademark Union Jack boxing shorts, whereas before that he'd been wearing black and orange for the first fight. I think he'd been wearing white and gold for his comeback fights, but he wanted to try and rewind the clock and come in as his old self, as a kind of return to form, to say, I'm back and I'm back to win. It's the old me. I feel like Joshua may be doing the same. So keep an eye out. Small thing, but keep an eye out. See if Joshua comes in wearing dark shorts, dark gloves, dark boots, maybe red, red and black, something like that. I like to look into these things, but if you want to disregard it, go ahead. It's just my opinion. Anyway, that was an aside, very long aside, but I feel the AJ needs more fire and grit, maybe a return to character, say the character that fought white. But I do feel some of the refinements that I outlined will go a long way. However, that's my bias, of course. That's what I understand of boxing. That's what I've seen needs to be tweaked based on the first fight. But based on the attitude surrounding this fight, I'll talk about AJ trying to return to form. I suspect that there's a real possibility that AJ dispenses with the kind of boxing finesse. And I think he's going to do so in exchange for more brute force. And I'm not sure if that's the best option. But when I factor that in my head, I try and envisage how the fight plays out. And I think the fight starts with a lot of tension, particularly from Usyk, the champion, because I think Usyk, he is going to be wary of AJ, who I suspect will be razor sharp and ready to rumble early. Usyk will have to walk a very fine line, in my opinion, between safety and authority, because he doesn't want to get caught with offense early. That would be a bad sign. But at the same time, he can't just concede ground. He can't just give up ground because he needs to stamp some authority in the fight so AJ just doesn't get so much forward momentum and bully him. It's a psychological thing as well as a physical thing. I think AJ will be ready for the slips and the glove control that Usyk will inevitably bring. From there, I can see Anthony Joshua attempting some meaningful offense early on. I think as soon as he sees that Oleksandr Usyk is doing what he's expecting, he'll be confident and he'll try and rip some offense right away. Probably just full-blooded long right hands. And I think that will mean that Joshua starts confidently and will have the bigger ring presence. He will be the big man in the ring. And this is, even if his offense doesn't land, I think just the speed of it, the sharpness of it will be enough to unsettle Usyk and have Usyk giving up that ground, as I say. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Usyk concede the first 3 rounds maybe. But I think those 3 rounds are going to be an opportunity for Usyk to gauge AJ's sharpness. And I think once he sees, okay, AJ's sharp, but I can maybe work around this, he'll start to relax and he'll start to stay in range, maybe explore some offensive opportunities. But I think the offense will be modest. I think Usyk will be start to rely on just jabs, long left hands, stuff that he can just get in, get out. And I think he's going to stick to that for a few rounds. Going into the mid rounds, I see this as the most dangerous time for Oleksandr Usyk. And the reason for that is I think Joshua will still be sharp here, but I think Usyk will start to be more comfortable. And that means more comfortable committing to his punches. And that will essentially give AJ better opportunities to counter. And I believe that if there's a knockdown in the fight, it will happen here. And I can see it being Oleksandr Usyk being the one getting knocked down. I'm not sure how heavily or how badly knocked down, but I just sense that it'll be around this kind of territory, around round 6. I think if Joshua does score a knockdown, I suspect that Usyk has the guile and the skills and is slippery enough to weather the storm and see out the round. But it will push his progress back a bit because he's going to have to regroup. Because I think once AJ senses vulnerability, if he hurts Usyk, if he knocks Usyk down, he will go for it. But on the flip side, I think Joshua may... There's a possibility in this fight that Joshua blows his load. Pause. I think if he gets into that mode where he sees Usyk vulnerable, I think he may lose it a little bit and might get a bit overzealous with the offense. And Joshua, he just doesn't have that kind of endurance. He's not the kind of guy who's able to recover quickly after his big energetic burst. And I think there's a probability that fatigue and the damage accumulation may sneak up on Joshua, who I imagine early on will have a lot of adrenaline racing from early in the fight, where he probably feels like he's getting some momentum. But I think I can see Usyk just using his modest offense, just picking and poking, landing flush shots here, this is an investment. All the while, Joshua's maybe getting a bit more fatigued because he doesn't have the experience fighting these kind of fights, these very high-paced fights, because that's what Usyk brings. High speed, high pace, intelligence. I think Joshua's going to accumulate quite a bit of damage, quite a bit of fatigue. And when Usyk senses that damage and that fatigue has accumulated on Anthony Joshua, he'll really start to up the heat. And I can see it leading to a stoppage, most likely a corner stoppage in round 9 or 10, I want to say, that kind of space. Now, I don't have much confidence in this prediction, I have to say, because I can clearly see how Anthony Joshua wins this fight and wins big. But when I tap into my intuition, I just see an Usyk win and a stoppage win. Usyk has proven that he's got more than enough power and offense to hurt Anthony Joshua. I think Anthony Joshua is going to go for broke. So Usyk's going to be... he'll have to be careful of the kind of onslaughts that Joshua may bring. But I do think Oleksandr Usyk is defensively astute enough and slippery enough and skilled enough to make it through those And Joshua, I just don't have faith in his stamina, even though he's probably trained super hard. I just think he spent too much time developing other qualities. And he needs those long rests after he lets go of his bursts or he finishes them. So I can see how Joshua wins, but I just have to go with Usyk. Usyk stoppage, probably a corner stoppage in round 9 or 10. That, however, is just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. This is a long one for you guys to watch, so I'm going to try and give some chapters, make it so it's easy to navigate this video, half an hour long. So thank you for listening. Leave all your comments in the comment section below. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know, I'll get back to you. Thank you, as always, and I'll catch you on the next video.